So, namaskar friends and welcome once again. Let us start our lecture number 4. In the previous lecture, we talked about Purushartha, one of the concepts that is multidimensional, and provided a framework for understanding what the human life is all about and what are the different aims and objectives through which the life is led. We basically talked about dharma, artha, kam and moksha, the 4 most important drivers of human life. We also try to understand how they are quite apt and appropriate even in our modern life and can really help us in our professional life. Now, in this lecture we are going to talk about leadership and personality in Indian ethos, how leadership and personality have been conceptualized and understood. So, let us again begin by an episode in the great epic Mahabharata, the moment of choice, Krishna, Arjuna and Duryodhana. Well friends, all of us know that the quality of life depends on the choices that we make. So, one of the most dramatic scenes in Mahabharata offers a perfect case study in leadership choice. Before the war, both Arjuna and Duryodhana approach Krishna seeking support, and Krishna offers them 2 options. One, his vast Narayani army, and second, he himself unarmed and non-combatant, available only as guide and charioteer. And we find that Duryodhan seated near Krishna's head. Please mind this, the position of their sitting. He is sitting near his head while Arjun is sitting near his feet. So, Duryodhan sitting near the Krishna's head immediately chooses the army, the visible machinery of force, numbers and institutional power. Given his personality, this may be understood. Arjun seated at the Krishna's feet chooses Krishna himself, presence, counsel, strategic intelligence and moral clarity. And how this choice makes all the difference in the long run is for anybody to see. The battle of Kurukshetra is not merely a war between 2 armies, it is also a collision of personalities, values, ambitions, loyalties and moral visions. On the one side we have Pandavas carrying legitimacy, but also uncertainty, dependence and inner conflict. On the other side are standing Kauravas who are rich in power, hierarchy and military force, yet deeply shaped by ego, entitlement and wounded pride. This contrast is already prefigured in the choices that these 2 have made between Narayani Sena and Narayan himself. The visible architecture of power and intelligence that gives power direction. It is this tension between force and wisdom, hierarchy and counsel, ego and ethical clarity that the study for leadership and personality interrogates in Indian knowledge system. So, what precisely is the same thing to do? What a leader has to give preference to? And we already have these 2 leaders in Arjun and Duryodhan and their style of leadership. As leader, Duryodhan, true to his character, loves to show his power and prowess rather than listening to someone's wise counsel. On the other hand, we find Arjun, who makes a sane decision of choosing Narayan himself because he knows if he has wise counsel, he can strategize better and can make maximum out of his limited resources. Tirukkural is another treatise in which we have leadership as ethical listening, justice and public reason. It is attributed to Tiruvalluvar and consists of 1330 couplets arranged in 133 chapters, each chapter containing 10 aphoristic Kurals. These are organized into famous tripartite framework of Aram, that is virtue, Porul, that is polity or wealth, and Inbam, that is love, a Tamil reformulation of the broader Indian ethical concerns of dharma, earth and calm. Of this, the Porul section 700 couplets deals with kingship, ministers, justice, diplomacy, war, social order and civic responsibility. What makes the text particularly striking for leadership studies is that it grounds political authority in ethical cognition rather than sovereign force. And this is the reason, friends, the Arjuna model is preferable to the model of Duryodhana, because Duryodhana's model is steeped in sovereign force, not in ethical cognition. Thiruvalluvar repeatedly argues that the first quality of leadership or rulership is not command, but the capacity to listen, deliberate and judge wisely. This takes us to our initial opening discussion, where Vidura is trying to make Dhritarashtra realize the consequences of this war, but Dhritarashtra fails to understand that. Why? Because he is not interested in listening to him, rather acting on his own. So, a good leader has to be a good listener, a patient listener. His insistence that the greatest wealth is the wealth of hearing turns listening into a political virtue. A ruler who cannot receive counsel cannot govern, or a ruler who gets counsel from the people who are not good will also get astray. Fine. So, this is not passive receptivity, but a disciplined form of public reason, where the leader must distinguish wise ministers from flatterers, justice from expediency and long term welfare from immediate gain. So, leadership is about being wise, about being righteous, about being discernible. The section on ministers and statecraft further emphasizes foresight, selection of competent advisors, timing of action and protection of subjects, making the Tirukkural an early and highly refined manual of ethical governance and institutional leadership. So, friends, whatever is contained in Tirukkural is a very important guide to our skills in leadership. The text refuses to separate private virtue from public authority, as many a time we believe that my public life is my public life, I will do whatever I like. But no, if you are a public figure, whatever you do, private or public, this all has a bearing on your image and on the decisions that you take. A king's anger, greed or inability to hear criticism is treated not as a personal flaw, but as a structural danger to the polity, because such leaders have a tendency to become autocratic or fascist. This is where the Tirukkural becomes theoretically rich. Leadership is imagined as a continuity between personality and institution, where the ethical failures of the self scale into failures of governance. That means a leader also has to exercise restraint, emotional restraint, and has to maintain ethical and moral persona even if he is not on job, because that has a bearing on his leadership qualities and decisions. Another very important discussion on leadership can be extracted from Jatak tales. They are Buddhist Jatak tales that comprise 547 stories in the Pali canon, and they narrate the previous births of the Buddha as Bodhisattva in human, royal, ministerial and even animal forms. So, unlike Sutra style abstractions, the Jatakas teach through crisis, dilemma and consequence, making them especially relevant for insights on leadership and personality. A particularly rich example is Mahasadha or Umaga Jatak, where Bodhisattva appears as the wise minister Mahasadha, repeatedly resolving political and interpersonal crises through intelligence, patience and fairness. His leadership does not rest on military force, but on prudential reasoning, mediation, evidence based judgment and the ability to foresee consequences. And obviously, it provides us a very important insight into decision making and leadership. Similarly, the Syama Yatak, ethical authority emerges through devoted care and responsibility toward vulnerable dependents, showing that leadership legitimacy may arise from service and moral reliability rather than formal office. So, a leader, the true leader is one who is caring, compassionate and is treated as a protector rather than destroyer authoritarian. What makes the Jatak distinctive is that they frame leadership as narrative ethics. The listener does not simply memorize virtues, but learns how qualities like compassion, foresight and justice function under real conditions of uncertainty. So, scholars of Buddhist philosophical thought describe this as Dharmaraja model, where rulership derives legitimacy from ethical care, non-cruelty and welfare oriented judgment, not mere sovereignty. So, friends, as true leaders, we need to practice ethical care and non-cruelty and also take into consideration the welfare of all the people who are dependent on us. Another example of leadership may be found in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, where self-regulation, attention and executive presence are key concepts. So, Yoga Sutra of Patanjali provides one of the most rigorous indigenous psychologies of personality in Indian ethics, comprising 195 aphoristic sutras divided into 4 padas: samadhi, sadhana, vibhuti and kaivalyat. Text is fundamentally concerned with how disciplined practice reshapes consciousness and conduct. The foundational belief yogas chitta vritti nirodha, that means yoga is the regulation of the fluctuations of the mind. It offers a profound basis for leadership studies because it places attention, reaction and cognitive steadiness at the center of ethical agency. So, somebody who is composed, somebody who is balanced, somebody who is not blown by his personal whims and fancies and emotions is somebody who may be capable of taking right decision. So, for leadership the crucial insight lies in the paired concepts of abhyas, that is sustained disciplined practice, and vairagya, that is detachment, which together create the possibility of response without impulsivity. So, somebody who keeps learning from each decisions one makes and at the same time is capable of taking a decision which is not subjective, but objective and neutral, is the one who may be treated as a true leader, a good leader, a just leader. A leader unable to regulate fear, anger, distraction, ego or compulsive reaction inevitably destabilizes institutions. So, Patanjali's psychology anticipates contemporary concerns with executive presence, mindfulness, emotional regulation and decision making under uncertainty. These are the challenges for any leader in any age, how they can maintain utmost objectivity and can take the best decision under a particular circumstance. It moves beyond modern trait theories of personality, because it does not ask what qualities a leader has, but rather what disciplines make ethical steadiness possible. So, while the modern studies always provide us black and white terms that these are the qualities that a leader should possess, these treatises talk about those inherent changes in one's personality, behavior, thought pattern, philosophy, which certainly make them worthy of leader. In this sense, personality becomes a practice of mental governance, where focus, patience and inner equilibrium generate outward authority, and the authority does not come with the post, it comes with the responsibility. Again, moving to Jain ethics, Anekantvad and leadership. Jain ethical philosophy offers one of the most intellectually sophisticated models of leadership through the doctrine of Anekantvad, the principle that reality is irreducibly many sided. Rather than treating truth as exhausted by a single proposition, Jain thinkers insist that any judgment is always partial and standpoint bound. That means, no judgment in the real sense is the ultimate. This insight is systematized through Syadvad, where propositions are qualified as true from a particular perspective. For personality studies, the leadership implication is striking. The responsible leader must cultivate the discipline to withhold absolutism, hear competing standpoints and recognize contextual truths, and then only he will get the real picture of a situation and may be able to take a decision that is the most suitable. In plural organizations and democratic institutions, this directly translates into inclusive decision making, conflict mediation and dialogic negotiation. Even in Panchatantra also we come across strategic intelligence and the politics of perception. Panchatantra is attributed to Vishnu Sharma, and it consists of 5 books of interlinked animal and courtly tales, each devoted to practical intelligence in governance and social survival. Unlike overtly moralistic texts, the Panchatantra trains the reader in situational awareness, motive analysis, alliance building and communication strategy. A classic example is the lion and the rabbit, where brute authority is undone by the rabbit's manipulation of perception and timing. So, it is not about authority alone that makes you worthy leader. It is also about your intelligence, it is also about your sensitivity, it is also about your practical wisdom. So, the rabbit studies the lion's psychology, redirects his aggression through narrative framing and turns the lion's own ego into the cause of his fall. The lesson is not merely cleverness, it is that leadership depends on reading emotions, anticipating reactions and understanding how stories shape action. In Raghuvansa by Kalidasa, again kingship, conduct and the aesthetics of leadership has been so discernibly discussed. It is one of Kalidasa's most sophisticated Mahakavya, tracing the lineage of the Raghu dynasty from King Dilip to Ram and beyond. More than a dynastic narrative, the text becomes a literary meditation on how ethical personality is embodied in rulership. A particularly rich example for leadership studies is the episode of King Dilip and Nandini, where the king's worthiness is tested not in war, but in his humble service to the divine cow. Dilip's kingship is validated through care, restraint, patience and the willingness to protect what sustains the larger social and cosmic order. So, It is not that we always value valor, war skills or warrior like prowess in a king or a leader, rather we also value their kindness, compassion and ethics of care. The leadership insight here is profound. Authority is not reduced to sovereignty or force, but is aestheticized as graceful conduct under responsibility. Kalidasa repeatedly links kingship with composure, symbolic dignity and measured action, making personality itself part of political legitimacy. This moves Indian leadership theory beyond utilitarian governance. Again, let us take another example from the Tamil epic Silapadigaram, justice and moral authority beyond office. The Tamil epic Silapadigaram offers one of the most compelling literary models of leadership through truth speaking and moral resistance. The central scene of Kannagi confronting the Pandya king after Kovalan's wrongful execution transforms ethical truth into a form of authority that exceeds state power. Kannagi does not rely on inherited office or institutional legitimacy, rather she produces evidence, rational accusation and fearless public speech, exposing the catastrophic consequences of failed judgment. This makes the text extraordinarily relevant to leadership studies in that the king's error is not merely personal, it represents a failure of institutional discernment where haste and poor counsel collapse justice. So, friends, one of the major takeaways from this episode is that while taking a decision as a leader, you should never be in a hurry. A hurried decision always leads to some kind of disaster because mostly it proves wrong. So, Kannagi's personality by contrast is shaped through courage, composure and unwavering commitment to truth, and it allows us to discuss leadership as moral legitimacy grounded in accountability, while also opening feminist and subaltern dimensions. Ethical authority may emerge from the marginalized subject who confronts the failures of official power. This makes Silapadigaram one of the strongest Indian literary sources for thinking leadership as justice centered personality. Again, Basava and Vachana tradition that also we can talk about. Basava radically redefines leadership by relocating authority from hierarchy to ethical wise, labor and collective discussion. His Vachanas composed in Kannada are themselves acts of democratized knowledge production. The famous line translated by the famous English poet A.K. Ramanujam, and I quote, "The rich will make temples for Shiva, what shall I, a poor man, do? My legs are pillars, the body the shrine." It transforms his spiritual authority into embodied ethical labor and inner integrity. Equally important is the institution of Anubhav Mantapa, a 12th century dialogic assembly where men, women, artisans, laborers and poets debated ethical and spiritual questions. This gives you a rare Indian model of leadership through creating spaces for collective reasoning and inclusive participation. Likewise, Akka Mahadevi, fearless selfhood and the politics of authenticity. Akka Mahadevi offers one of the most radical literary models of personality in Indian ethics. Her Vachanas of around 430 that survive today stage the self as an arena of resistance against imposed social identity, gendered expectation and courtly authority. Her refusal to marriage as political conformity and her uncompromising devotion to Chena Mallikarjuna makes selfhood itself an act of ethical dissent and existential courage. She shows that authority may emerge not from position but from courage to inhabit truth despite social punishment. So, her participation in the Anubhav Mantapa further places her within a dialogic public sphere, making her a striking example of leadership through radical self presence and moral independence. So, there are different dimensions of leadership that have been presented in all these models, and they come handy when as leaders we have to take crucial decisions. Katha Upanishad, Nachiketa and the courage to choose the higher good again is yet another study in leadership. In Katha Upanishad, one of the principal Upanishads associated with Krishna Yajurveda, it offers one of the most profound models of personality through the figure of Nachiketa, the young seeker who confronts Yama, the lord of death. The text's basic structure revolves around three boons, culminating in Nachiketa's insistence on knowing the nature of the self beyond death. Nachiketa keeps asking the lord of Yama, what happens after death? Tell me about that reality. What makes this narrative extraordinary for leadership studies is the refusal of destruction. He is promised a lot. You take the kingdom, you take the Eravat, you take this, but he is unhindered. He is seeking answer to his question. When offered wealth, longevity, pleasure and sovereignty, he rejects them all as transient and chooses what is enduring truth over immediate gratification. As leaders, friends, we always have to be durdarshi, far sighted. We need not to take decisions that might give us instant profit, rather we must take decisions that may sustain long and give us something solid in the long run. The famous distinction between Shreya, the good, and Preya, the merely pleasant, provides a profound ethical framework for leadership. A leader does not have to be distracted by Shreya or Preya. I mean, he has to choose Shreya over Preya. That means, what is good, not pleasant, will be his concern. So, as a leader, his personality is tested not in comfort, but in the ability to choose what is right, difficult and future oriented over what is easy, attractive or politically expedient. In oral and community traditions also, a truly distinctive Indian model of leadership emerges when we move beyond elite textual traditions. Fine. In many Adivasi pastoral, agrarian and village traditions, leadership is not centralized in a sovereign individual, but distributed across councils, elders, ritual specialists and community memory keeper individual, community memory keeper. Authority here is relational rather than hierarchical. The legitimacy of a leader depends on trust, experience and accountability to land, seasons and community welfare. So, nobody has a claim to that and nobody qualifies for it automatically, rather his commitment, his understanding of the people makes him one of the group. The critical insight here is that personality is shaped less through charisma than through reliability, memory and ecological responsibility. So, they are looking at a person who is seasoned, who is compassionate, who is caring, who is sensitive to their needs, and the leader emerges just like that, not by brute force, but by his ability to lead the group. So, we have seen there are different important models that have been discussed in different Indian scriptures of personality and leadership, and each of this model always emphasizes a leader who is not driven by any kind of sense of authority, but a leader who is driven by a sense of responsibility, is grounded in ethics, and also trusts other people and their counsels before taking a decision. The decisions are taken in the best interest of the community and concern, rather than they are expressions of his own personal choices or expressions of his whims and fancies. So, friends, I hope this discussion gave you some insight into the idea of personality and leadership, and we, as we move forward, we continue to discuss many more topics in our upcoming classes. This is the select bibliography that you can look at. Thank you very much. Stay tuned for the next class. Thank you very much.